Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. It is Dewana DIY and I'm here to share a pattern hack on how I made this top with this pattern. So stay tuned, and if you have any questions or feedback, feel free to put them in the comments. Alright, so today I'm going to be sharing how I hacked the McCall pattern M7654. I use this beautiful orange shantung fabric I got from moodfabrics.com, and to create this lovely pumpkin sleeve top, I will be hacking this version of the pattern. So the pieces that I cut out were number 4, 5, and 6 for the bodice and 8 for the sleeve. I did not use number 9 for this hack. So here are all the bodice pieces lined up. Don't forget to line up your notches as well, or you're going to be very, very sad. So here's where it gets really fun. So I took bodice piece number 4 and I extended it by 5 inches at the bottom. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I had no idea what I was doing, but this was the first thing that came to mind to do. I actually had to adjust it a little later on, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Alright, once you have that piece cut out, you're going to create the sweetheart neckline. I used a French curve ruler, but I promise you, you don't need one. You can honestly hand sketch it or use the bottom of a coffee mug to create the shape. Once you are done creating the shape, now you can cut it out and voila! It's already starting to look like a top. Now you could move on to your other pattern pieces, and all you're doing is extending it by 5 inches. Also, I wasn't too concerned about the chalk marks on my bodice because I knew I was going to end up using it as lining, so it didn't really bother me that I made a giant mark in the middle of it. And the good thing is you can always wash out chalk marks. Also, don't forget you need 2 sets of your bodice pieces. I decided to use my main fabric as my lining fabric as well. You can do the same, or you can use a different color lining. Alright, so now that you've cut out all your bodice pieces, now it's time to do the sleeves. Alright, so once you've pinned your pattern piece to the fabric, you can start tracing at the top. But when you get to the sides, you're going to extend it by about 2 to 3 inches. Remember, the wider you make it, the bigger the puff. Same goes for the bottom. I extended the bottom by 3 inches. I honestly would have done more width and length, but I ran out of space, as you can see. Also, you can use a hip curve ruler to give you the slight curve that you need to shape the bottom. I also used a French curve ruler to round the curve off at the center. So once I was done with the sleeve and I cut out all the pieces, I put all of the pieces on the mannequin just to see what it would look like. I love this part. It's so great to see the outfit coming together. As I was doing this, I can tell you I was so excited to see the outcome. So now it's time to sew the bodice pieces together. Do not sew the sleeves in just yet. That's going to come in a little later. Also, don't forget to press your seams. I didn't record a lot of those parts with sewing and pressing because I really just didn't want to move my phone around so much. Now we're going to give the bodice a shape. I don't really know what this V-shaped dip in the bodice is called, but I've always loved how it looks. I used a hip curve ruler to create the look. I used the mark from the bottom of the original back bodice to start the curve, and I drew it down to the center of the bodice. Don't let that random chalk line fool you. That's not the center. Also, don't make it a point at the center. Leave it a little flat for when we finish the edges. So once you're done tracing it, you can fold it in half and cut it out just to make sure that both sides are the exact same. Next, you're going to take both your lining and your main fabric, put them together, and you're going to trace out the bottom of the bodice just to make sure both of them look identical. Once you're done cutting that out, you can put aside your main fabric, and now we will be putting the boning into the lining. All you're going to need is pieces of gross grain ribbon and the boning. You can start with rounding out your boning using a pair of scissors and then adding the gross grain ribbon to the tip. This is to help it not push through your fabric. Make sure you leave a little bit of space on top by the ribbon so that you can sew over it. You're going to cut it about 3/4 inch away from the bottom, and then you're going to do the same thing you did to the top. You're going to do that for all the other remaining boning pieces. Make sure your boning is placed at the center of the seam, and you're going to sew all the way around it. Start by sewing the gross grain ribbon onto the lining, and then you're going to sew all the way around at the very edge of the boning. So this is what it should look like when you're done, and when you flip it over, it should be clean and you can see the center seam and both stitches on the right and the left side. So now you're going to take your lining and the main fabric pieces, you're going to put them right sides facing, pin them up at the top, and then you can put them aside for later. Now it's time for the sleeves. The first thing you're going to do is create a casing for the bottom of the sleeve where you're going to insert your elastic. I started by serging my ends first, then folding the edge over for a 1/4 elastic to fit through. You will need to press the fabric in order to create that fold at the edge. Sew it down, and now you can add your elastic. You're also going to create a casing for the elastic for the top part of the sleeve as well. Once you've added the elastic, you can pull it a little bit to the size that you need. Also note that I actually put the sleeves together before I put the elastic in, but it also doesn't matter which one you do first. To keep the elastic in place, you're just going to sew the edges of the casing. Once you've done that, your sleeves are ready to be attached to the bodice. When you bring your bodice pieces back, they should have been pinned at the top. You could sew it at the top, leaving a space for where the sleeves are supposed to go. Before adding the sleeves, make sure the bodice without the boning is the part that's facing you. Now you're going to take your sleeve and make sure the seam from that sleeve is facing towards you. Now you're going to pass it through the bodices, and then you're going to line it up at the seam. I didn't like how the pattern instructions were written for this particular part, but you were free to use it. This is how I did it. And now sew those pieces together. So now you're going to take your lining piece, the part that hasn't been sewn yet, you're going to flip over the bodice, and now you're going to sew the lining piece now to the main fabric. Also, make sure you're lining up your seams together. And I hope you've been paying attention to notches because I haven't mentioned it once since I first mentioned it. We're almost done, but now we have to add the zipper, and I hate adding zippers. One thing about the zipper I will note is that I did not use a separating zipper, so I had to squeeze right through the bodice, but I really do recommend a separating zipper. It would make it so much easier for you. Also, I used an invisible zipper, so if you're using an invisible zipper, make sure you're ironing out the teeth so it lays a little flat. And when I say ironing out the teeth, don't actually iron on the teeth. You're just opening it out just a little bit so it lays a little bit more flat. As far as instructions for adding the zipper, the instructions are also in the packaging for the pattern, but you can also look here to see how I did it. So if you don't know this about me, I love finishing any seam with bias tape. So I made bias tape with the fabric, and I also lined the zipper with it to give it a more clean finish. Look at how the bias tape looks on the zipper. It is so clean and it looks so good. Now it's time to finish off the bottom and we're done. So first thing you're gonna do is edge stitch the main fabric and the lining together. Starting at the back of the bodice, you're going to use the same double folded bias tape to hem the bottom. When you get to the center front of the bodice, this part can be a little tricky. Take the bias tape and fold it backwards to right sides facing. Then you're going to sew an arrow pointing towards the fold. Trim the corners, fold it back over, and it should have created a corner for the bias tape to turn. Now you can finish adding the bias tape to the rest of the bottom of the bodice. When you sew all of that together, your pumpkin sleeves top is complete. Well, that's it. Hopefully you were able to follow along. Don't forget to subscribe to Dwana DIY and also follow me on Instagram for more DIYs.